Hello, everyone. Welcome to another 100 Days of No Code workshop. Really excited to be here with Prajot and Damien. This is the third workshop in the series that Prajot has been putting on all around learning enough code to be dangerous with no code. So in today's workshop, we will be exploring how you can start building your own plugins on Bubble to start leveling up your Bubble project. So hopefully that sounds interesting to you guys. We're going to have filled questions throughout, and it's going to be as interactive as we can make it. And yeah, let's get going. Over to you, Prajot.
Hey guys, hi Max. Thank you for the intro. Let's get started. So to begin with, I'll just create a Bubble project to start with. So we come to this place and then I'll go to the Bubble homepage and create a new app. We'll call this app workshop demo plugin and so on. Okay, cool. So this is other details. It's fine. This is internal facing app. What's a goal? Other cool. So yeah. So we'll just start with like a very fresh Bubble project, and then I'll create a new plugin. The agenda for today is basically to go through the basics of DOM, HTML, CSS. We haven't covered that in the past two workshops. And when you're building custom elements for Bubble, those are the basic concepts that you need to apply. The other thing we'll cover today is jQuery. So Bubble plugins come built in with jQuery as the base. So, and jQuery is actually a pretty good thing to start with playing with the DOM. So we'll cover the basics of jQuery. And then we'll get into building a very basic custom button, because like that's where you start. You have to build like a button to understand how it works. And then we'll build a backend action. So that's kind of like a overview, and we'll see where it goes. Awesome. So we'll start with a blank page. Close this. Awesome. So we have like our workspace. So the one thing which is super important here is like while testing and creating plugins, you need the name of your Bubble app. So in your URL, you go to this ID and you just copy it. Now I'll go back to bubble.io. Okay. So now I'll go to my plugins and I'll create a new plugin. So we'll call this. Oops, Right. So now the plugin UI looks very similar to the Bubble dashboard. So you have 7 tabs on the left. The first is General tab. So here you put in your plugin name. You can upload a URL, profile pic, which will show up in the plugin store. You can write a description here. So all this is like for App Store listing. Service URL is where people can contact you when they need some help, or it's where they go to for documentation or how the plugin works and so on. Instructions you can just add here on like how to get started. And demo page is like an example use of this plugin as a demo that people can play with. This category determines where it will show up in the search of the plugin marketplace. So you need to choose at least one. So for now, we'll just choose any random one because it doesn't matter. So that's the general settings. It's then you come to shared settings. So shared setting, this is there's this top setting at the top. It says the plugin uses jQuery 3, and the tick mark is on the right here. So if you disable it, it won't use jQuery 3, but we want it to use jQuery. And I'll come to jQuery soon. Uh, Also, you can choose a version of the Bubble plugin. Since we're creating a new one, we'll go to version 2. But what this basically means is that over time, Bubble might make changes to their API for creating plugins. So you might have to upgrade at some point. So that's why this is important to know, but not important for now. And then you have HTML headers. So this is where we need to know a bit of HTML to understand what's happening here. So now we'll go to HTML and learn some CSS, HTML, jQuery, and then come back to plugins. So when you come to a very basic HTML page, right? So you start with this doc type HTML tag, and then you have this HTML tag to start with. then you have head, and then you have body. Right? So that's pretty much a basic structure of any HTML page. Uh, so this one, I'll remove this. Yeah. So HTML, head, body, right? So this is how a basic document looks like. Then within head, you have title, which defines the title that comes on top of the browser bar here. And then you have some meta tags that are required for SEO, for how the viewport will size on different mobile devices, uh, and so on. And also you can upload your CSS files in the head tag. So any external CSS file that you want to use, you add it here using the link tag, right? So that's one aspect of it. Uh, and one like body is where all your actual HTML content goes. So if I go and inspect like this website that I'm on. So you can go to settings, and here you can open the inspector tool, or you can just do Control Shift C on any website and it will open up the inspector window. And in most websites, like they have disabled, so they have right click here, so you can just do inspect and come here. So when you go to elements, you actually see those three things. You have HTML, you have head, and you have body, right? So this is how it's made up of. Within head, you can see all the meta tags for SEO and for like Twitter, how what image to show. You have all the CSS and like icon files that you have linked, and then you have like these script files here. So they have a lot of those. Right. And then inside the body is where all this thing is. So I can choose this icon and go to like one specific thing. So I'll go to like this tab and it'll show me like where this tag is in my DOM. So what is a DOM? So when you look at this is basically an XML file. So an XML file has like these tags, and they have an opening and a closing tag, which determines like what this means. So and an XML is basically a tree data structure. So you have nodes, and then they have more nodes, and then they have more nodes. So inside body, you will have a div, and then you'll have a closing div. Uh, and then within this div, you can have a paragraph tag. Uh, and then here you'll say hello, and then you close the paragraph tag. So what's happening here is like you are creating this tree, right? So the top node is HTML. Within that, you have head and body as siblings. Within the body, you have div, and within the div, you have p tag, right? So that's pretty much like a very basic idea of what DOM is, or how your HTML content is structured, right? Regardless of the no-code tools. So here again, you can see like the tree, and you can browse it down like this. So you know the hierarchy of things. Cool. So now that we understand how that works, uh, so now once I save, you can see hello over here because I made a p tag, and then I can create a b tag which is for bold, and I can say hi, and then I'll close it. Cool. So this is a bold b tag, and this is like how my DOM is looking. So one thing about like this thing is like, so this is asking what do you want to put in your header tag. So what will come inside the head tag, right? So what we end up doing is all the common things that we need across all our plugins or across all our elements we'll put in here. So things like a custom CSS file, like if you want to use a JavaScript plugin, although JavaScript external JavaScript file, they'll come here. So that's one. Uh, and additional keys and shared assets and resources are something that we'll come to later because they're slightly advanced. But one good example of this is like, so Google Analytics gives you a snippet. And in that snippet, they have your ID, which will tell Google Analytics that this is the website that people are coming from. So you can add it here as this API key. So I'll just get that code. So if you just search for Google Analytics code, it'll give you you'll just pick from a set. Okay. Right. So this is that code. So Google will give you this code and then you can copy it and you can paste it in your plugin here. Uh, and then you have like this custom API key. And this like, so the idea of plugin is like we're building it once and then many people can use it. So this is hard coded where this string is hard coded for 100 days of no code website. So here you can replace it with underscore asterisk underscore uh, Google Analytics key. Right. Now, when we save this and we install the plugin will ask us for a string and then it will replace this area with that. Uh, so Bubble chose like this format to parse through this last string and then they replace it with this value. Right. And it automatically identifies like the key defined by the user is Google Analytics key. So these are the kind of things that go into the header tag. And one thing which we'll use is called animate CSS. So this is like a very cool library which has built-in animations for buttons. So you can do a lot of cool stuff here. And so we'll just copy the CSS of it and install it. So there's this link. So we can copy this link. We just put it here. Right. Awesome. So now that this is done, we can now go to elements. So API calls is very similar to the API connector in Bubble, and it's useful if you want to, like, let's say we are building a weather API, and there's some code that we want to write for every user. Then we can create an API connection here, and people can give their key, and we'll run the API on their behalf. But we'll look at a different way of doing it because like this is not like really user friendly or it's pretty much hardcore, so it's not good for like a beginner's course. uh, right. So we'll go to elements and this is where we create our first button. So before we come and create the button here, we'll create the button in JavaScript. So the basic syntax of creating button is you write the button tag and then you close it, and in the here you write the name of the button, like click me, right? And then you get a button here. And we can see like our DOM, this is how our DOM looks like. Awesome. So now things that you can do with button is you can give it a class. So you can say like primary, right? You can give it an ID, and ID can be okay, first button. Right. So the difference between a class and an ID is class is like many buttons can have the same class or many elements can have the same class. And then the CSS that applies to one class will apply to everything. So this is very similar to how you create styles in Bubble. So you create one style and then you apply it to all the different elements. ID is unique to this button. So this is important if you want to just get access to this button in code and do something on it. So like you have to define what to do when you click on this button, right? So now if I go to my JavaScript file here, what I can say is, so I've imported my jQuery. So now I have jQuery access in my code. So I can say dollar and then hash is used to get the, like select something in my DOM tree by ID. And the ID was first button, right? So let's just log it and we'll see what we get. Okay, so we need to import our script file. Uh, Script is in src index.js. So that's where the file that we are calling now. Awesome. So now, yeah. So once I do this, it will come here, it'll run this code, and I get like this jQuery HTML button element. So now my jQuery is able to get this data. Right? Cool. Uh, Now what I can do with this is, so I can say dollar hash first button. So this is the access to that object, button object now. And then on that button object, like we looked at in Airtable, we can do all these things. We can run all these functions. So one function is text. So we can change the text of it. So we'll call it hello world. And then when I run it, it change the button text to hello world, right? And I also have a CSS here. So I've defined all these properties. So I'll just remove it for now. So now it looks like this. So now I can say, okay, background of my button has to be a cyan color, and I save and it becomes that color. So this is basically all the styles that you do visually on the UI, and here we are writing it in text. So I can say color is white. My border is 1 pixel solid hash, right? And then I can say width is, so height is 100 pixels, and then I can say font size is 24 pixel. Cool, right? So by typing these key value pairs or dictionary, we are able to change how the button looks. So that's our CSS, and this is right now applied to the button. Like all buttons will have this. If I create more buttons, they'll have the same style, right? So you can just test that out. So if I copy this and I remove the class and ID, uh, call it, right? So now I have two buttons, but they have the same style because I have applied the style to button. But if I change it to dot, what's the class name? Primary, right? So if I change it to dot primary, the first one will get the style, the other one won't. So that's how you use classes to apply different styles. And then I can have dot secondary and just copy some of it. And then here we'll give it that class. Right. So yeah, so now we can see how we can apply, so how classes are used. How IDs are used is like, so if I do this second button, I can get access to that object here. So I'll do $hash second button dot text. So now if I run this, it comes and changes this to hello world and then changes this to second. So now that we know what's happening, I'll just summarize it. So we created this structure of our document like a tree. Uh, we added some data in the header. We added all the content in the body, uh, and then we added a JavaScript file. Now that JavaScript file basically uses jQuery, and using that jQuery, we are able to extract those elements from our DOM, right? And elements are buttons, paragraphs, lists, tags, whatever, like all the basic stuff that you can get. And then you can change the values of it. You can change its color, you can change its CSS, background, all the properties of it. And jQuery lets you do that. So jQuery is like this library which lets you change the data in your DOM directly. Uh, so that's the basic concept. So now we'll come back to our bubble and we'll add a new element. So we are making a button element. So let's just see how the button element of bubble works right now. So if I copy paste it here, so you have like this text, which is where we added the text before. And we can use the same inspect element inside bubble to see what's happening. So when I click on this, you can see this button tag, right? So this has an ID of this random value they've generated. It has a class of inner element. It has this hard-coded style applied to it. And then this is where the edit me is, right? So this is where we were adding text before. So this is how the button looks like inside Bubble. And these are all the CSS properties over here, right? So you can change it here to see how it would play around with that. Uh, yeah. So now that we understand like how it's actually working underneath, we can start to play with it. So when you look at like a bubble button, you have certain features. You have like how it looks like. You have a ability to edit the text of it. You can change the width and height. So I can change this to 190 and it'll be larger. I can set a style here. And then you can also start edit workflow, right? So what happens when you click on this button? Right? So let's try to recreate this to the best of our ability. So we'll come here and we'll create a add new element. So this element will be custom button. So now you get like all these different options here on the left sidebar. So here we'll just go one by one. So first you have the name. So this will be custom button and this name will show up here. Then it has a category. Is it a visual element or an input form? We'll just set it to visual element. Here you can choose an icon. So we'll just choose some random icon for now. Cool. So this is the icon that shows up next to the like our element on the left side. Cool. Then here you have like these options, like is it resizable, right? We want our button to be resizable. We'll not go into responsive right now. That's like advanced. Then can you change the background? Can you change borders? Can you change padding? Can you change box shadow, font style, right? And then do you want to support hovered and press states? And yeah, so I mean, you're just enabling all these things, and then Bubble will create those UI there for us for all those things. Do you want to support uploading large files? So this is not related to uploading, so we don't want this. We want the is visible property there, yes. Do we want to auto bind? Because this is just a button, we don't really have any data which is binded to it, like in like a list. So we don't need to tick that. And then it asks her first for like what is the default width and height. So a good default width and height for a button can be 200 by 100. So we just said that. Now it comes to fields, right? So what are fields? So one field which we need is basically the text of the button, right? So we want people to be able to change that. So we just call it button text and we'll create new field. So now it automatically generates this value button underscore text, and the caption is button text. Inside the editor, we want it to be a static text because we'll just manually write like they did for edit me. To get it dynamically, you can set it to a dynamic value. And if you're creating a field for, let's say, a graph or a chart or something, you can set it to a dropdown. Yeah, I mean, lots of options here, but we'll just go with static text for now. This is not a long text. The button text is generally small. And you can set a default value here. We'll just call it click me. Awesome. And then here you can add some documentation. This will set the text of the button. So we just need that one field. We don't need any state at this point. We do need event. So we need a click event. So what we'll do is we'll call it click. So what happens when you click on this event? So because like we are not, Bubble doesn't know that this is a button. We have to define our own custom thing. So we have to define now an event on this that will trigger from our code, right? So what happens when you click on this element? Cool. Great. So we don't really do we need an action? I think we need an action.
Prajot, I was just going to ask if Damien, wasn't sure if Damien had any questions on what's been kind of walked through as of yet. Not sure. Yeah, just wanted to make sure. Yeah, you had that. All good. Cool. Perfect.
Cool. So we just created the clicked action for now, and now we have to write the element code. So the thing that we added in shared, the CSS file there, that is for all the elements that we'll create in this plugin. So plugin can have multiple elements. And if you want something specific for an element, it goes into the element code. Now there are three basic aspects to it, three different code files. So one is initialize, second is update, and third is preview. So initialize is basically when you actually run your element. There's the starting point, like the first time that it runs, it'll run the initialize first. And then every time something changes about that button, it will run this code. So this only runs once for the first time, and this will run every time some field or a value of the element changes, right? And preview is basically how the button looks like inside the bubble editor. Right. So how your element will look inside that bubble editor. So that code comes here. Now, one cool thing which Bubble did is like they have auto-generated documentation kind of for some things. So you can actually see what each of those objects mean. So in like the first and second parts of this workshop, we looked at objects and dictionaries and how they are key value pairs. So Bubble is actually passing, it's calling this function on our behalf, and we give the logic inside this function when the element is initialized, and it's passing two objects to it. So one is an instance object and the other is a context object. So instance object has a canvas, which is basically the wrapper around our button. So any element we build, it will have this container, right? So that's the instance element. Then you have event, trigger event. So this is how we can actually trigger a click event from our code. And that when we click that event inside a workflow, people will be able to create workflows around it. So we'll look into that. Publish state is how you can set a state value from your code. And then you can set height, and data allows you to, so when the code runs for the first time, we can set something in our data, and then when it's updated, we can fetch that data from our instance, right? So this is for storing something during start and then fetching it later. uh, Context is basically the context of the user in the app. So since this plugin is going to run for multiple users across multiple bubble apps, if you want some user data, like who is the current user for that app, so each app will have users, and then you can get the current users data to show in that. Like, so an avatar element would have like the profile image of the user, so you can check in the list properties if there is an image, and then you can show that. You have access to the jQuery library inside context. Upload content is for uploading some files, so we won't look into that today. Async is something that we did in Airtable last time, but again, this is too advanced for now. And key, yeah, like the other things are basically like we won't go into that because we don't need that for a button. So what we need is basically jQuery from context, canvas from instance, and trigger event. Cool. So what do we want to do when this starts, right? So what we want to do is we want to first, so I have some code I'll just copy, so I don't forget. Okay, awesome. So what I'm doing here is I'll get jQuery, and with jQuery I'm creating a button here. So jQuery has this cool functionality where you can define some HTML here, and it will create that button in memory. For now, it's not drawn to our DOM. It's an object in our variable. So button is actually a object that we can then add to our DOM, right? So instant.canvas is the div that is created when we create our element. So we append our button to it. Then we set the height of our button to 100%, which will match the container's height. And then we set the data of our instance to this button because we'll need that in the update. So let's just do this for now and see what happens, only this part. Now to actually test, we'll need to copy the ID of our bubble dashboard. So you can put it here. It'll set it up. And once it's set up, it will go to the test app. And now we can actually test our element inside bubble. So that's the name. Workshop plugin 100 days. This is the it's called custom button. Okay. Yeah, so this is our custom button that we created. So here you can see there's no plugin preview available because we didn't add that code. We get the same inspector. The reason for that is because we ticked all these buttons. So now we get like an ability to set the containers width. So I can set it to 250 and my container width is this box. So the button will be inside our container. So that's the gray area. And cool. So you can change that. This is the button text. So again, we have not wired any of this yet, but we just have the container working now. Now, if I do a preview, because I've added the start thing, so now we should see a button here without the text. It will just be like an empty button. Right? Uh, so just to rewind, I added something in the initialize thing. So when you actually run this code is different from when you preview it. So this is the first time it runs. So when the first time it runs, we create a button here like this. So you can see there's no text here. So if I type hello and save it, and then I'll refresh this one, it'll say hello. Right. So I'm able to create a button here. And then I'm adding it to my container. So I'm appending it to my container. So if I look at the inspect element of this thing, yeah, if I go into inspect, so you'll see like this is my div bubble element that I've drag drop custom button. And then within that, I've appended this button tag, right? And I've set the style of height as 100 and width as 100. So I've set the CSS height to 100, width to 100, and I've appended it to that instance, right? Does it make sense? Any question?
I think we're all good. I've not seen anything in the chat, so yeah.
Okay, awesome. Uh, cool. So that's kind of like we are setting here. Now let's set up the preview. So we'll show it and how it looks like in the editor. So I'll just copy this. Right. So this is where the preview is. So right. So again, what I do is the same thing. I call jQuery here, and then I have this button tag which I'm creating. But within the preview, I'm getting this properties argument. So the properties argument, if I do show documentation, it will give me the button text. Like so, the fields that I created here, they are passed in the property argument. So I can access them as properties dot button text. So it will show here all the properties, and then all the CSS arguments which user sets in the editor, like the color, the font, that you can get from properties.bubble. And then you have all these functions. So width, and then you call it as a function, you get the width that is set by the user, right? So that's what we'll do here. So first we get the button text. So that way when user changes, our preview will update. Uh, Here I'm just logging, so I'll remove this. Now I start setting the CSS. So jQuery, once the button is being created, it has this .css function where you can give the property name and then the value of the property. So what we are doing is we get, okay, so what is the width? So we say properties dot bubble dot width, and that is 200. We add pixels to it and we set it to the height of our actual bubble button inside that container, right? Uh, Cool. So let's just see how this looks like. So I'm setting height, width, background color, and font size. I'm not changing anything else. And then I finally append it. So this is my preview. So here I'll just refresh this. Cool. So now we are seeing the button actually showing here. So now we can actually start changing stuff. So if I change this to max, uh, my button preview will update. Okay. I can change my width and my button adjusts. So now whenever I'm doing some changes over here, this code is running. It's creating the new button. It's setting the height, the width, background color, and font size. So if I change my font, uh, this won't reflect because I'm not changing the font family. I'm only changing the font size. But if I change this to 24, this will become large, right? So now I basically built a custom button element inside Bubble where I'm changing some properties here and it's being reflected on my element. So these settings, something to note is like these settings are actually for the container element, the div. Uh, to add it to the button, we have to do uh, apply it to specifically that button object. And then finally we say instant.canvas dot append that button, right? So that is super important. And this, like, I was always confused, like what's happening, by changing that, but my button CSS is not changing, is because that is only for the container. For the button, you have to then copy each of the properties that you want to change, which is super cumbersome, and I don't know why this decision was taken. But basically, that's how it is. So for everything that you want to map, you have to write a line like this, right? So if I have to do font family, I'll say font family, uh, and then properties dot bubble dot, and then I have to look here for where the font family is. So font face, that's what they call it. And then I call it as a function, uh, and then it's saved. Now I'll refresh. For it to load. So if I change it to Arial, it should change it the font. Okay. Why not change it? Okay. Weird. So we'll use the magic to see what's happening. Right. So yeah, that's weird. Fine, we'll try a simpler one. That's crazy. Keeps going. Yeah, we can use bold. Uh, so bold is basically, and so font weight is basically bold. Uh, if the so so here we need to use if else because they give a boolean for bold. Uh, so we'll check if this is true. Then you want to set the font weight as bold. Else we want to set it as none. Right. So now if I refresh, so I can now change bold in container and it changes the bold here. I'm still not sure why this is not working. Yeah, maybe they changed their API. Right. Uh, cool. So yeah, so we're coming back. So now we know how this works, and over here, like those settings will not reflect yet on them because we haven't really set them to a start. So so we've only set this for the preview. For a start, we have only set height and width, right? So it will only match that part. Now we need to set the update aspect. So what happens? Update is which is run whenever something changes. So that's where the rest of the code mostly goes. Uh, uh, Right. So here, what we do is like, again, we set those properties here of font size and we'll add a bold thing as well. So font weight will be, so properties.bubble.bold is true. Then we set it to bold, else we set it to none. Right. So here so what we did also is like instance.data.button. So we set this button to instance.data and then we can access it inside update because there's no direct way to access that variable apart from this. So here again, you can set the CSS. We also set the text because when you come to start, there's no properties object in the initialization. You only have properties object in update. So that is where you actually have the value of your fields. So we set the text here using this for our button. And then this is where we are doing the events part. So I'll come to that after we've tested whether our visual aspect of our element is working. So I'll just refresh this. So now it should match whatever it shows in our editor, right? So now it's showing as max. Uh, so what I can do is I'll make some changes. So do this. I'll change its width to 400. We'll change the font size to be 36. We'll keep bold. Awesome. So now if I preview, this will update. Cool. So now our visual aspect is one-to-one mapping between the editor. So we have created like the visual aspect of our button. The next thing we need to do is we want to, when we click on it, we want to launch some event. So in this button, we don't have that start edit workflow because it's not really defined yet. So the way this works for custom elements is when we come to our workflow, we'll be able to we'll be able to choose a button. Right. Right. So a custom button click. So you come here, you go to elements, you see a custom button clicked as a trigger. And why is it saying clicked is because we created this element trigger as clicked. So we created this. So we can create another one forward, create new event. So now if I go back to my editor, I'll have to refresh. So now if I go to elements, it'll too slow. Right. So now it's saying a custom button forward, right? So you can define all these custom events, and then for each of them, you can trigger them from your code. And then when you trigger, then people can define normal workflows that they do, right? So now let's see how to trigger that or when to trigger that. So the if you want to do the hover when we click on the button. So now we come back to code once again. So the way to do that is you select a button. So you select this button using this code, $# first button, and then you say dot on, right? So dot on then allows you to define some events. So there are some default JavaScript events which HTML provides you, which is dot on click is one, on mouse over is another, on mouse enter is another. So they are like the things which HTML API will trigger when something happens. So if you do on click, then what you pass it is a function which is called a callback function. Like not to get scared, but basically you're passing it a function which will get run whenever a click is registered, right? And here you do something. So here we'll alert hello. So if I save this, I added it to my first button, and when I click on this, it will alert hello, right? So this is how it basically works in this, and I can just do the same thing for the second button. And then on click, like you can do it on hover. So on hover, I want to like alert will go crazy. So I'll do console.log hover. Let me just move this on hover. It's actually on mouse over. Okay. So yeah, let's see the syntax. So we can go to jQuery events list. So you have click, double click, mouse enter, and mouse leave. So yeah, I'll use mouse enter. So now whenever I enter my mouse over the second button, additional hover is logged, right? So these are like the basic events which exist. So click or mouse enter, and mouse leave is when I move away, and mouse move is when I'm over it. Let's see. Yeah. So whenever I'm moving over the button, my mouse move is getting triggered. So you can see this number going up. Okay. Cool. So these are like the events that you can do. So we'll do this here. So in our update code, what we have done is, so we say instant.data.button.on click, right? So what do you want to do on click? We want to do trigger the event clicked, right? So that's the name we gave to our event. So instance dot, so the container dot trigger event clicked. So now what this will do, this will trigger that box in workflow, and then everything under that will run, right? And we can do another instance dot data dot button dot on mouse enter, and here we can say instance dot trigger event hover, right? So this will trigger the hover workflow. Cool. So now that we'll save it, and then we'll come here and refresh. Cool. So right. So now when I click, this will come here. So what we can do very quickly is just do alert. So yeah, we can hide some stuff. So we'll create a few things to hide. So I'll just add like this button. And then here we can say, okay, hide this button on click. So now I'll refresh. So when I click on this, it will hide that button, right? So what's happening when I click on this, this code of dot on click is run. It comes inside this, it triggers this clicked event. When this is triggered, it comes inside this workflow. Inside this workflow, it runs hide button, hide me. right? So when I do this, it will hide this. Awesome. So we have now a full functioning button working, which we have made from scratch. Uh, and we can do the same thing for hover. So when I hover over this, it'll again, it'll show that button. Let's do that. So it'll show hide. So I'll hide, and then when I come back, it'll show. So I can click to hide, and then I'll come back and it'll show that. Right. So I have both those events working, and I can make as many events work. There are like tons of events. You have more, and then you can combine those in very interesting ways, which is how you build tooltips. You can build drag drop. So all those mechanics are built based upon those basic events that jQuery or HTML gives you, and then you combine them in interesting ways. But yeah, so now one thing we'll do very quickly before we end is we'll create a action. So actions are what show up here. So click here to add an action, and within our plugins, we'll see some action here. So the action we'll create is we'll call an Airtable automation that we built last time. That basically takes in a row of data of cities, and it will fill out all this data from Bubble. So when we click on this button here, it will generate all the data for these cities in Airtable, and it will run our automation. So to run our automation, we just need this webhook. So we'll copy this webhook, and we need to do an API call. Now to do an API call, we create a new action here. We call it Airtable uh, set or call Airtable automation, right? And you can't do client side because of CORS issue, because Airtable, when you call Airtable from a client side on Bubble, it'll say that you can't call another party's website from within Bubble domain. So it fails. So server side is what we'll use. So server side, it goes to the backend of Bubble. And then from their backend servers, they'll do that API call and return data back. Another benefit of using server side is in server side, you can return some values with your actions. When you run client side actions in Bubble, they are just going to do send out data. So like, let's say if you want to uh, send some data to your analytics server, right? So, or you want to do some logging of some action and so on. So that's why client side actions exist. They cannot return any value at this point. But if you want to return some output and use it in the next step of your action, so you'll need to use server side plugin. So we don't need any fields. So this is very simple. I already have this code. I'll just copy. Right. So if you look at the documentation again here, it's like show documentation. Here you have properties and context. Properties let you fetch the field values, which we don't have in this case. Here you have something called as request. So in JavaScript, you have something called as Node.js has a library called as request. So they have basically added a wrapper over it, which allows you to, which simplifies how you call that request. So you don't have to use promises, async await and stuff. So you can just do context dot request, and then you pass it a dictionary. So the way this dictionary has a URL, it has a method to do the API call. So Airtable webhook is a post call, and my body is empty here. So it's just a empty dictionary, and that's how it looks like, right? So I'm just doing this API call whenever this action is run, right? So this will be saved. Now I can come here and refresh. Right. So whenever this button is clicked, I can remove this. I remove this. Uh, I'll come here. I'll go to plugins and I'll do. So I can see my custom action here now. It's called call Airtable automation, and I'll just do that. So now this is done. So now I'll just refresh and I'll open my Airtable here. So now I clicked on that button. So this automation should run, and all my data is now filled, right? So we create a custom element. we added a click and hover event on it. We visually made it sure that it was showing in our preview, it was showing in our run mode, and it was updating when we are changing data. And then we called it, created a custom action that we linked to our click event, and that basically ran an automation which filled all this data. So yeah, that's I think the gist of where we are. Uh, so any questions?
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, Prajot. Yeah, it was awesome. Did you have any questions, Damien?
Not really. That was super interesting, actually. Still a lot to digest, I have to say. So I'll definitely to go over this later this week and try to do it myself. But yeah, super interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, no, yeah, thanks, Prajot. You're probably exhausted after doing 3 workshops in a row. Yeah, well-deserved break. But yeah, and I'm sure if you have any more questions, yeah, I'm sure Prajot's happy to just take them on Slack. Yeah, if if that's okay, Prajot.
Yeah, cool, awesome, anytime.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
yeah, please go on.
no, there's one last thing. Like this like last tab of versioning and license is where you can choose a license for your plugin. You can make it open source MIT license. Then anybody can see your plugin. They can edit and copy it, and the code will be available. You can make it private to use within your internal Bubble apps, just for yourself. And you can make it commercial, where you can still publish it as a paid plugin. And when you do a commercial, Bubble actually does a review of your plugin, and you can authorize, when you use internal, you have to authorize an app, and only that app can use it. The other apps can't. Uh, and then there's also versioning. So you can submit different versions with features so that people who are using existing plugins, their existing apps do not break, and then they have to manually choose to upgrade. So yeah, they like this tab is basically for all the management of publishing your plugins to the plugin store of Bubble. And this is where you see all your reviews. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Amazing.
Cool. Any other thoughts, Damien, or questions, or yeah, all good to wrap up?
No, frankly, at this point, I just need to, because that was on my bucket list anyway a long time ago. I just need to get my hands dirty, and then I'm sure a lot of questions will come up.
Nice. And did you just going to ask? Did you get that software? I'll just stop recording. 2 secs.